Hi everyone, I'm Nicole, welcome to my channel, and we're starting with a failure, which is nothing new for me. So I originally tried to make this out of epoxy sculpt. It was not working. So in with the super Sculpey polymer clay and Cos clay. Now I had the idea to make some type of cool fantasy inspired salamander. I found this foliage and I was like, Avatar, Pandora, salamanders, let's do this. I've been hoarding this rock for ages that I found in a stream that I fell into, and now we're going to make something very cool. Now the first step in using any polymer clay is always conditioning it. This is going to make it nice and workable. You can see what a difference it really makes. Now we're going to be using an armature. Armatures are great for saving on clay, but they're also going to prevent our sculpture from cracking. Now your armature does not need to be pretty, just functional. Here you can see I'm just using tinfoil and making it the rough shape of a salamander. I'm just trying to make something that my clay can stick to. Here I'm making some spots for the legs and the arms. Can I see those after I add the clay? No, but I was trying to be smart. So here I start adding the clay in even sheets. This is going to help me build up the body. I keep looking at my references and this lets me know where I need to add clay or take it away. I start smoothing everything out, and this is going to help me refine the shape. You can see here that this guy definitely goes to the gym. He's got a real nice looking neck and a good set of pecs. Now, salamanders are nice and smooth, but they do have a lot of subtle shaping. You want to make sure you get that right, especially on the head. I pre-made a bunch of epoxy sculpt eyeballs, and we're going to use them on our salamander. Here I'm building up the eye area. Salamander's eyes are a little bulgy, so I'm just giving a place for those eyeballs to sit. I'm just using this rounded ball tool to make a space for them, and this liquid clay is going to act like glue and keep our eyeballs from falling right out of his head. Now on Pandora, usually the eyeball sizes are switched, but this looked better to me. And this is art after all, and I can do what I want. I used the tiniest little snakes of clay to keep those eyeballs inside and looking more natural. Now we can move on to our snoot holes, which are very important. I mark them out and then I add tiny balls of clay. This is just going to give it a little bit of shape and make it look more realistic. I'm using this awesome super poker from Ace of Clay, by the way, and you can find it on his website. Now I really jam this thing in there and make some nice little snoot holes. You want to make sure they're even or he's going to look wonky. I gave this guy the cutest little subtle smile and it made me love him so much. Now one thing that's important when sculpting any animal is remembering there's muscle underneath skin. So you want to add in that subtle detailing that makes it look like it's a real creature that moves and has muscles. I did eventually find my little previous leg holes, and now we can move on to the arms and legs. I'm not gonna lie, I struggled with making these legs. I don't know what's up with salamanders and the way they're shaped, but it was tricky. But I figured it out by breaking it down into easier shapes and combining them all together. I knew I had to do these assembly line style all together or they were never going to match. First we start off with this cute little hand, and then we added this piece on top. I cut fingers into the upper arm piece, and this is going to make it easier to blend into our fingers. It's also going to give it that subtle shape that salamanders have. I made sure to blend it but leave the little palm so the hand can still be seen separate from the arm. I went ahead and added some little wrinkles to the fingers. This gave it a lot of cool texture, made it look really neat. I also wanted to add some lines where the muscles and creases are going to be. This is going to give it more believability. And you just don't want too many blank spaces with no detail. Now that we have adequately detailed legs that are nice and smoothed out, we can work on the other parts of the arms and legs. Now for the upper area, it's a very simple shape, a little nubbin, and we're going to add a little piece of clay that's going to be a little skin fold. Because like I said, this is a real animal, it's going to have skin and muscle lines, and I'm making sure to blend this into the body really well. Don't forget your little wrinkles. They really bring it together. I use a little bit of alcohol here just to make sure there's no fingerprints, and we can add the bottom part of the legs to the upper part. You might need to add a little clay on the underside to really help it blend together. Now, could I have put some wire in these legs? Yes, but I did not think about that until after I finished it. I go ahead and add some wrinkles and some folds. The more legs I added, the trickier it got not to smash my work, but if you're super careful, you can get around it. Now that all my legs are attached, I can texture the bottom side. I'm using Glade Press and Seal, which is kind of like saran wrap, proving that anything can be a tool if you want it to be. Now my original plan was to make this guy removable so that I could paint him way easier, but of course that didn't work out. So we're going to use some liquid clay adhesive. This really helped me get the fingers exactly where I wanted and worked out much better. I really took my time posing the hands and the arms and the legs. If they're off, people are going to notice, so take your time, move the positions around until it looks nice and natural. Now that the pose is set, I can move on to texturing the rest of the body. Now it was a little tricky to do the arms, but with a nice soft paintbrush, I could get into all the little cracks and crevices really nicely. Now he's beautiful, but he's a little too perfect, so we're going to give him a little bit of character, a little battle damage, a little bit of age to spice it up. And you also gotta admit, some well-placed scars makes him look way cooler. Now I'm gonna continue texturing the top of our salamander using that Glade Press and Seal. Now salamanders have these adorable little rolls on their back, and of course I needed to add those as well. I couldn't get this subtle of a line with the epoxy sculpt, and this is why if you're struggling with one material, try switching to a different one. Now it's time for a bake. We've preserved all of our lovely details so we can move on to our tail. Now the tail was too wibble wobbly for me, so I added some floral wire around our tin foil to make it more sturdy and bendable. Cosplay is going to be perfect for our tail so that it doesn't break. I'm just going to make a very simple tail shape and cut into it, not all the way, just enough to slip my wire inside. Then I'm going to seal it up and smooth it out. I know our tail looks a little skinny, but we're going to be bulking it out and shaping it up. You really want to concentrate on where the tail connects to the body. If it's too thin, it's going to look weird, and if it's not smoothed out properly, it's going to look like you just jammed it on the end of your salamander. I like adding bits of clay as I go, looking at it, seeing where I need to add more, then smoothing everything together. I'm really going to focus on that connection and smooth it out. I made some really nice thick noodles of clay and put it along the bottom. We're going to blend this into the tail because salamanders tend to have a more rudder-like tail, so that's what we're going for here. You want to make sure the connection is really good so that it doesn't break off. I do the same thing to the top and blend it in, and you can kind of see what we're going for now. I smoothed out the bumps so that it blended into the rest of the body, and I used my fingers in a pinching motion to make that fin more pronounced. This also made a really cool texture that I loved, and I decided not to try to smooth it out, but to enhance it. I ended the tail in a point just to make it look a little cooler. I of course continued our rolls so that these two pieces look like one. I had to change it up on the tail so that it didn't mess up my little fin detail. Cosplay is softer than Sculpey polymer clay, so it took the detail a lot easier. I also wanted to make sure that I was texturing inside of the lines as well. This makes it look so much more natural. And of course, let's continue on that battle damage. This guy has been through some stuff. He's a tiny little survivor. Now that our tail's done, we can go ahead and put him in the oven. And yes, I had to pose him weird so that his tail wouldn't get smushed. And give him some boobs and some love, because he's my best little boy. Don't break in the oven. And he didn't. Now that we have our perfect boy and he's not broken, I was like, he needs something else. He's a little too boring. And that's where I decided to give him some little frilly gills. I used the same pinching technique that I used on the tail, and they came out looking really good. When I added the last fin, I took a lot of time blending it into the head so that everything looked like one piece. Texture is always your best friend. After giving our gills a little bit of character, it's back into the oven for this guy, and that's why I love polymer clay. You can just bake them and save your progress and add on to it later. While I was waiting for my little salamander to bake, I thought, why don't I make him some friends? I looked up what we have in our lakes and rivers, and I decided to make a Pandora version. I picked a water beetle, a type of crustacean, and a little worm. I really had fun making these, but I will say if I wasn't putting these inside resin, I don't think I would have used Super Sculpey for this because it can be very fragile. Now, I don't think a salamander would have these appendages like the larger creatures on Pandora do, but sometimes you just gotta do it for the aesthetic, you know what I mean? So I decided to make some. I'm using some copper wire here and using a smaller wire over the top of it. This is gonna stop the clay from spinning. I really wanted to smooth these out and make them look like they were attached, so I took my time doing that. Smoothing cosplay can be a little tricky, so I used a little bit of their liquid softener, put it over the antenna appendages, and used my fingers to smooth it out, and that worked a lot nicer than just using my fingers. Now I can take all my little creatures and put them into the oven for their last bake. Also, I like to keep it real here, so this is what my workspace actually looks like that you can't see. Isn't it beautiful? Ta-da! Everybody made it. But, of course, since I'm a perfectionist, I'm going to sand the life out of these antennae to get them even smoother. Cosplay works a lot nicer with wet sanding, so I used that method. Then it was on to taping off this rock. Was it tedious? Yes. Did I love ripping it off? Also yes. After 14 years of taping, our whole rock is covered and protected. I added some extra tinfoil to the bottom so that our tail wouldn't rub. I went ahead and added some toothpicks to our smaller items. This is my favorite way to paint those little tiny pieces. Popped it into an old silicone mold, and now we're going to prime everything with a nice bright white, which is going to give us nice bright colors, perfect for Pandora. I looked at some pictures of the creatures on Pandora to get some ideas for what I wanted to do with the colors, and then I just went for it. I loved these bendable antennae because I could just move them out of the way as I painted. Once I added the orange, I knew this was going to be good, so I made sure to accent the entire body with it. I made sure to do a darker orange and then highlight it with a lighter orange on top. This is going to bring out the patterns we're going to add on next. I took my time painting here. I am not good at airbrushing, but I love it, and that's a good enough reason for me to do it. It really gives you a nice blend, even if you're a bit messy and have to fix your mistakes like me. My smaller critters are going to get the same paint treatment as my salamander. I'm going with really fun, complementing bright colors and just having a good time. One thing I loved about the Pandora creatures is that they use really bright colors that you don't normally see together. So I tried to push myself to really just have fun with the color palettes and throw things together that I wouldn't normally do. Even our worm is going to get a nice little ombre here. I wanted to focus on the details that made Pandora creatures special, and their patterns are definitely it. So I had a lot of fun making these really cool stripy and dotty markings all over their bodies. Now I wasn't sure how detailed I wanted these guys to be, but I figure if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. At least that's my motto. I'm an artist who's all about the details. So now we're going to detail our salamander, and this is what's going to take it up a notch. First, I go in with a darker orange, but I don't want it to be too dark because I'm going to need to add a darker orange on top of this as well. It's all about layering those colors. For the patterns, I went random and just had fun with it, but I tried to make sure that the patterns on each side of the tail somewhat matched. I freestyled all of these markings, and I love how they came out. This process was tedious, but so worth it. I really took my time and really tried to add in some fun patterns. I wanted to keep the paint a little translucent so that it wasn't so bold. I wanted to add some interest to the gills as well, so I added a thicker band around the edge of each of them. I went ahead and filled in all the details with the darker orange. This made all of the little wrinkles stand out. and then I went around each of the patterns that I just made along the edge, kind of like how leopard spots are. When you have a lot of detail and texture on a piece like this, you want to make sure to highlight all of it so that it doesn't blend into the background. Of course, this process can be tedious and take time, but it's always worth it in the end. I made sure to use a shade that was slightly darker than the green I had already had on the body, and went in and highlighted all those folds and wrinkles and little details. I went ahead and painted all of our scars pink. Did I do a copious amount of research into what color Pandora creature's blood is? Yes, I just found out that the Na'vi have red blood. That's all I could find. Now, if you get any paint on your rock, do not worry. A little bit of alcohol and a brush will take it right off. Now, your eyes can make or break your sculpture, so of course I messed it up. It was going great with this cool yellow and a little bit of orange on the outside. Then I gave him pupils that were all off and he looked really creepy. So I redid him off screen so I could freak out in private, added some little reflections, and now we can move on to the bioluminescent part of this project. Now I needed to do a little bit of experimenting to figure out how much powder to use. If I used too much, it would look like white spots all over the body, but I had to use enough to get a good glow. So once I found that perfect ratio, I went ahead and dotted it all over the body. I picked which areas I thought they would look good, but honestly, I just kind of went for it. To get effects like this, I prefer using a really high quality glow powder and mixing it in with some type of gloss medium. This is going to give you the best glow you can get. Since everything seems to glow on Pandora, I made sure my little critter friends also had some bioluminescence to them. Then I went ahead and glossed up my entire salamander. I made up an acrylic box to hold all of our resin water, and I made sure to use real water to make sure that it wasn't going to leak. Then I decided that I needed to fix this issue. The hand lifted up a little bit while baking, so it was floating a little bit, and I was like, oh, I'll just add a little bit of moss. And then I just started adding moss all over this rock. Now that my rock is adequately mossy, we're going to move on to our plants. I went ahead and added these spacers to the bottom of everything so that it would sit where I wanted it to. I'm going to add a layer of sand first, so I need everything to be tacked down so it doesn't float away and move. The epoxy sculpt was perfect. It gave it just enough of a platform where I could glue it down, and as you can see, nothing is going anywhere. Now I've used many resins, but I've never used a deep pour one. Always make sure you are reading all the instructions, especially how to mix it. This is a 2-to-1 ratio. I had some vermiculite on hand, so I said, hey, I can use this as sand. It was a dumb idea. I'll tell you why later. I'm going to carefully mix up my resin, making sure to take all safety precautions. Now, when you first pour it together, it's going to be very swirly. You want to mix until it is crystal clear. Then I started adding my vermiculite. If you notice, it's a little floaty. It likes to float. Foreshadowing. I added in some brown resin dye, which really didn't do anything because I was a little worried about it separating. Here, I'm pouring it in slowly. You want to let the resin move around all the items that you have in here. Then I just use a tool to work it into all the areas. Getting this guy in without smashing everything else was tricky, but I did it. Then I used a spoon and some tools to get this mix where I wanted it to. After that, I put it in my pressure pot to cure. The next day, we were ready for our next layer, which is going to be the water. Mixing the resin for this is pretty much the exact same, except I added some green and blue pigment to the water. A lot more green than blue. Then I very carefully had to get it into place without pouring resin on everything else, which turned out to be quite a challenge. Once I had all my resin in, I put it back in my pressure pot for another 24 hours to cure. I let this sit for days before I decide to demold it because deep pour resin usually takes a lot longer than regular epoxy. If I look hesitant in these videos, it's because I am. Should I have been wearing safety gloves? Yes, definitely. So do as I say, not as I do. Now, the hot glue that I used was ridiculously strong. Thank God I didn't use that to seal the entire box. I would have never got it off. I did deal with a little stickiness from the glue on the bottom, but I wasn't too worried about it. Now resin tends to creep up the sides and you'll get a little bit of flashing where everything connects. So I went ahead and very unsafely cut all of that off. But then of course, I ended up scratching the resin. Nobody's surprised here because I am really good at making mistakes, but I'm also very good at fixing them. We got a nice bubble here, and as you can see, the vermiculite did separate. I tried to sand some of the damage, but ended up only making it worse. So I had to figure out a plan on how to hide all these defects. I figured adding a frame would make this piece more complete and hide some of the issues. So I used some very thin wood, and I used a paper template to figure out how thick I needed to make them. Then I went ahead and stained them. Then I cut up some of the plants we used in this piece, made them extra tiny, and I covered up the rough edge with a little bit of gloss. Now I can move on to the frame. I added some quick dry glue and glued it right to the bottom. The sand was a little bit uneven, so this will hide that as well. I used my hot gun to flatten out a couple of these plastic leaves. This gives it more of a 3D effect as well, which I really liked. With some carefully placed leaves, you can't even tell that I messed up. A little tip for you is don't poke a resin piece with your finger to see if it's cured, because it's definitely not going to be cured, and then you get to add another layer of epoxy to cover up your fingerprints. But it's all going to work out because you need to add some of your little leaves to the top anyway. I went ahead and just filled in any open areas with some of those leaves so it looked more natural. The leaves definitely made this look a little more real, but our resin was a little too perfect, so I decided I wanted to add some water ripples. I'm going to be using Woodland Scenic's water ripples, which is going to be perfect to get this effect. I've never used it before, but it was super easy and super fun. It looks like a clear gel and dries clear as well. I used a thin paintbrush and tried to paint the ripples anywhere I thought the vibrations may be in the water. Anything that may move or anything the water may hit against. Thank you so much for watching this video. Big shout out to my subscribers. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be part of my community.